Je voudrais du soleil vert, des dentelles et des théâtres, des photos de bord de mer, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je voudrais de la lumière, comme en Nouvelle-Angleterre. Je veux changer d'atmosphère, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Ma fleur, sous la pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, qu'il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Je voudrais du Fred Astaire, revoir un latte.
All right, joining me now is Democratic Congresswoman Rashida Tlaib of Michigan, taking the other side of this conversation. Congresswoman Tlaib, welcome to Meet the Press.
Thank you.
You are easily, I think, one of the louder voices when it comes to impeachment. I'm curious of your reaction to Congressman Jeffries in this respect. Do you believe that leadership is being methodical? Or do you believe that leadership is trying to buy enough time where they say, we're too close to the presidential election in order to take it off the table quietly?
Well, I can tell you as one of the newest members of Congress, the traditional congressional oversight process isn't working. From subpoenas and trying to figure out what's going on with children being caged at the border, still waiting for a response from this administration, from even my colleagues on the other side of the aisle, when we're asking for Big Pharma to come before our oversight committee to testify about high cost of insulin, and they're telling them you don't have to come before the committee. A lot of the corruption that you see through the Oval Office is already seeping into the to the halls of Congress. I can tell you from day one, this president has misled Congress, has undermined his own cabinet members, and has lied to the American people. I have to tell you, this is a pretty remarkable time in our country. And if you saw, the largest class, incoming class before our class, was the Watergate class. And at that time, even though many people say that we didn't campaign on this, look at the fact that the majority, the majority of states across this country saw a huge historic turnout of people coming out to vote for the first time. And I feel like in many ways that's a referendum to stand up to a bully, to a president that subverts the United States Constitution every single day.
I want to play for you a quote from an interview I had earlier this week from an Ohio Democratic activist who is a bit frustrated with all of the subpoena on Capitol Hill. Take a listen, and I want to get your reaction on the other side.
They don't give a rat's you-know-what about his taxes, and they don't really care. I'm not saying that Congress should not chew gum and walk at the same time, but the volume on issues, kitchen table issues, needs to be louder because I want to win this election. I don't want to lose.
You hear, look, I have no doubt, and Congressman Jeffries ran down, I know you guys have passed other legislation and you do other stuff other than talking about the president's personal conduct. But his point was, it's the volume of conversation, it's the loud voice that he believes win the election in 2020 and stop worrying about his tax returns. What do you say to Mr. Beatrice about that?
Look, this is not about the 2020 election. It's about doing what's right now for our country. This is going to be a precedent that we set when we don't hold this president accountable to the rule of law and to the United States Constitution. Just look at the fact that currently over a number of abuses of power, but the public's trust is at stake. And we can't sit back idly and think that we can just pass health care reform and all of these issues which are critically important. But at the same time, you have an administration that's not providing the information, not following through on subpoenas. It goes hand in hand, and I think we need to stop separating the fact that we're trying to change people's lives for the better, but we have an administration that continues to violate the United States Constitution. Did you know, Chuck? I mean, he has not complied with the United States Constitution when he took the oath of office by divesting in his business businesses. So we have an upgraded version of pay to play. So when I'm on the ground right now in my district fighting against the T-Mobile and Sprint merger, T-Mobile is turning around, spending $195,000 DC as again an upgraded version of pay to play to get access to the most powerful corridor to power in our country, the president's office. And so for me to fight back against big pharma, for many of my colleagues that came there to pass really important reforms that are needed, we can't do it when the president of the United States continues to lie to the American people, continue to not follow through on subpoenas, and give us the information that we need.
Why do you think you can't convince a majority of House Democrats that it's time to impeach him?
No, I think it is moving towards that. It's going to demand it. It already is. This is a time in our country right now that we can't look back. I mean, think about what just happened recently. The first time historically did we exercise our war powers and said no more armed deals, no more kind of interaction in helping the Yemeni humanitarian crisis through our relationship with Saudi Arabia. And he turned around and pretty much ignored the Congress's decision, a bipartisan decision. Understand, again, it goes hand in hand. I think the American people understand that we can't do our job if the president thinks he's above the law, thinks that he cannot abide by what the United States Congress is passing through and asking and demanding of him. I got to tell you, from the wall to the children at the border to immigration reform to everything, we can't be able to do our jobs if we don't hold him accountable.
I'm curious, a fellow Michigander, Justin Amash, became the first Republican essentially to call or at least believe that it is time to have an impeachment inquiry. I know on Twitter you invited him to meet with you and sign your resolution on that. Did you meet with him? Have you spoken with him? And if you have, what did he say?
No, I haven't. But I got to tell you, I've worked with him in the Michigan legislature for a term, and he is somebody that truly believes the Constitution is brilliant. It's awesome. He's all about putting country first. I've known that about him for a very long time. He actually is one of the few that supported subpoenas administration about at least understanding what's going on at the border with children being separated from their family. He's one of the more courageous people that really does believe in the institution and believes in the rule of law. And I respect that very much, and I continue to uplift his courage and for him to, again, put country before politics.
It is Tuesday, the 28th of May of 2019, and you are in West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. I am your chef de cuisine, Justice Putnam, and our daily special is Tarrytown Chowder Tuesdays. That's right, folks. We do put roasted corn in this chowder. We are West Coast elites, after all. After all, wow, what a day yesterday. I don't know how it was for you. I wouldn't want to be in Dayton, Ohio right now. Jeez. Boy, talk about a massive hurricane. Was that just one? It was huge. And I fear there are death totals. I haven't seen them yet. Just the news that this terrible, terrible tornado. Did I say hurricane? I mean tornado. Touched down and destroyed a lot of property. So I've been getting reports in. People reporting in that they're safe. But I haven't seen the official totals yet for those who may have lost their lives in it. Well, yesterday we had what, back in the day when I was a kid, they used to call a gully washer. Water rain came down. It was, well, I also experienced this type of rain when I was in Hawaii, where you'd be sitting on the beach and the next thing you know, it's a shower, and those drops are big. And that came down, and the streets got flooded, and it was quite exciting. I checked my garden. Plants didn't get destroyed. There was so much rain coming down in such, well, in large, massive drops, as well as a lot of it. And I was a bit concerned that my plants could have been beat to hell, but they seem to have fared quite well, which means that there's just more minerals from the sky, and that's the best kind, too. Well, Trump started his day yesterday ranting about impeachment. Oh, thank you for honoring the dead who put their lives on the line for America's cause. Thank you for honoring them. Well, we all know he's not a real American and never has been. Just bear with me for a little bit. This might expose a bit of bigotry on my part, but I like to think that maybe I've experienced enough of a particular sector of the human population, and I can safely say that the majority of exceedingly rich people I've met don't have national allegiances. Oh, they ape it. They accuse everybody else of not being real Americans, but they don't care. Why else would they take their jobs overseas because it's cheaper over there than it is here? Who does that? Someone who has no national allegiance, only an allegiance to their pocketbook. And with that allegiance to their pocketbook, they wield a certain level of power. As we can see, they have their own fiefdoms. They expect behavior of a certain type. And that is saying yes to what I want and don't look into my finances. Doesn't work well in a representative democracy, but that's what's expected of us now, because do we have a democracy? Trump went on and on and on about a coup over the weekend. Even yesterday, a coup that judges who signed off on search warrants and the investigations themselves, this vast, somehow, it's a conspiracy. No, it's called democracy, Donnie Two Scoops. If you were an American, you'd know it. The other one that really cracks me up, does he think that the rest of us are as stupid as the people who voted for him? Do you think that the black voter as a bloc, which I have to say, don't count on that, but still, do you think that the black vote as a bloc is going to forget where Donald Trump came from and where his bigotry is born from? Do you think that the black vote as a bloc is going to forget about the largest HUD fine in history for racial discrimination in housing, paid by one Donald Trump and his dad Fred? Do you think that the black vote as a bloc is going to forget the Central Park Five, Donnie Two Scoops? Yeah, I was railing about the 94 crime bill, like we all have been. Thanks for joining, Trump. Thanks. A little late, but he doesn't know about the 94 crime bill other than the fact that it was put through by one Bill Clinton, who was impeached, and a Democrat. And now he's purporting to have supported a bill opposed to the 94 crime bill because it was so draconian, not once mentioning that he wanted the Central Park Five executed, maybe even without a trial. And after they were exonerated through DNA evidence and the actual criminal, who was a serial rapist, had actually confessed, and DNA proved he was the perp, even after all that, Donnie Two Scoops still wants the Central Park Five put back in jail. He railed against the reparations that they got for being incarcerated wrongly. Do you think, Donnie, that the American people as a whole are as stupid as the people who voted for you? He counts on it. And they will be counting on it in 2020. Well, at the top, that was Representative Rashida Tlaib on Meet the Press. God, I hate Chuck Todd. But at least listening to him, you don't have to see that weird clutch cargo goatee mouth of his. Eee. But, as she stipulated, impeachment is not about what is going to happen in 2020, but what is right now for the country. Now. We are in a crisis. It's not, for instance, climate change. It's a climate crisis. This is not a debate about impeachment. this is what is right for the country now. Now. I'm glad that she is a loud voice for that, because we need to have an investigation, and that's all impeachment is. I know Lindsay says they're going to squash it in the Senate. Of course they are. But the investigation will expose what it will expose. And the Senate doesn't want that to happen, whether they're going to vote on it or not. Because what will be exposed is that there's a lot of people with a few Russian rubles in their pockets, laundered through the NRA at least. What's on the rest of the menu here at the Bistro Cafe of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy? Well, another Trump official admitted she just doesn't care about following the law. Do any of them? 1 in 12 senior citizens did not have enough food in 2017, and now the Trump administration is threatening to make it worse. Chained CPI? Yes, indeed, chained CPI. And Trump's anti-science views are warping government's vital research on climate change, which is really a climate crisis. After the break, we then move to the chef's table, where Austrian white nationalist Sebastian Kurz is ousted from his position as chancellor in a no-confidence vote. Yeah, we reported on a sting operation last week, or we reported last week on a sting operation where members of his party were a little fast and loose with trying to make some backdoor deals, make a bunch of money, and maybe sell out Austria down the way, too. Yeah, no confidence vote. Sebastian Kurz, the horror. The horror. And 2 major shipping lines have raised their rates for transporting goods from the United States to Venezuela. War profiteering? Hasn't it always been an international business? All that and more on West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Bon appetit. Bottom of our homepage at netrootsradio.com. To the rightish of the page is the chat room link monitored by Kelly Lincoln. Thank you, Kelly. To the leftish of the page from the chat room link at the bottom of our homepage at netrootsradio.com is the link to, you could become a recurring Patreon of Netroots Radio and continue this resistance radio endeavor that we have endeavored for the last 8 years. Resisting, as the founders originally intended. And about halfway through that 8-year run here that we're still on, by the way, the machines we had in the beginning wore out, and we had to get some newish ones. And now these are wearing out as well. And we got to get some newish machinery. And your generosity has helped us put some money aside to be able to do that, plus pay the bills. And once again, thank you for your generosity. Oh, before I leave the homepage here, I have been putting in the HTTPS part of the URL address. That's the S on all of our links. But if you go to our homepage and you didn't go to one of our links, or if you even have, and there's not an S up in the URL address, add that and refresh. And your machine, whatever, you have a tablet, a phone, a desktop, that S will allow the player on our homepage to play on every machine. So put that S in for secure, HTTPS. Okay. If you would like to follow Netroots Radio on Twitter, you can at Netroots Radio. Tom takes care of that, as well as like the homepage and a lot of other things too. Thank you, Tom. You can follow me on Twitter at Justice Putnam. I post the show notes and links diary on Daily Codes about 10 minutes before showtime, and then get the links on social media in that little window. You can follow the show on Twitter at Cookbook West and pick up podcasts by way of Spreaker, Stitcher, TuneIn, iHeart, iTunes, YouTube, and wherever fine podcasts can be found. All right, this first offering here in the Bistro Cafe at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy is by Joshua Eaton out of Think Progress, a Trump administration official. Has shrugged off a law meant to stop federal employees from using their positions for political gain. Hatch Act. We don't need your stinking Hatch Act. I honestly don't care anymore, said Lynn Patton of the Hatch Act. Patton heads the largest regional office at Housing and Urban Development, and she made the comments in a Facebook post last week. Patton was discussing a tweet by the account at Education for Libs that she shared Wednesday from her private and official HUD Twitter accounts. The tweet lit into liberals for what it said was a double standard for Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and HUD Secretary Ben Carson. I find it funny how liberals will laugh and mock Ben Carson for a simple miscommunication, yet praise Ocasio-Cortez as if she's a genius. One of them is a brain surgeon who separated conjoined twins at the heads, and the other just figured out what a garbage disposal is. Case closed. Well, I hate getting into minutia because this is what they do, the gish galop, throw out a bunch of meaningless information out there, and then while you're debating and explaining the misinformation and giving the correct information, they're making more misinformation. But let's be clear. There were no garbage disposals in New York in any even new buildings until almost the 80s. So think of all the buildings that have been built for however long New York has been around. Not one of them has a garbage disposal. And even the Trump buildings don't have garbage disposals. Let's be clear. Okay? And it wasn't a miscommunication on Ben Carson's part. He doesn't know what an REO is. And he's running HUD. And the reason he's running HUD is because he's black. And that's Trump's way of, look, I'm not a bigot. I got a black guy running HUD. And this Lynn Patton, if you remember, she was Mark Meadows' best friend. This is one of my black friends. She's been close to Trump for a long time. You ever hear him be bigoted? And of course, she sat there and said nothing, and Mark Meadows continued talking for her. Because essentially what he was saying is that, look, we're not bigots. We allow certain black people to be grifters too in our administration. We don't exclude them. Well, the Hatch Act has been violated by, oh my God, this is too many. We're looking at, right now, I'm just giving a quick scan here, and I'm counting Hatch Act violations that have actually been filed. And we're looking at almost 30 people in the Trump administration who have violated the Hatch Act. Well, I guess everybody's doing, and it's not a crime anymore. Well, she has been a controversial figure since she was appointed. She previously worked as an event planner for the Trump family and has no experience with housing policy. In the end, liberals will only serve to destroy themselves in this great country when successful men and women from the private sector refuse to become public servants and a target of their undeserving partisan hate and obstruction. Which, once again, you reach a certain level of monetary gain in this country, you no longer have national allegiance, and the real Americans are the enemy of the state. This next offering here in the Bistro Cafe of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Tarrytown Chowder Tuesdays, by the way, is by the great Joan McCarter out of Daily Kos, and this was a front page article yesterday on Daily Kos. Feeding America, a non-profit organization that operates hundreds of food banks across the country, reports that 5.5 million seniors, or 7.7% of the population over 60, did not have enough food in 2017. And the situation not only isn't improving, but is getting worse. Not all of these food insecure people actually fit the federal threshold for poverty. In fact, 2/3 have incomes above the official poverty line, which is a good indication that the calculation needs to be reassessed. But they are financially strained enough to be eating less or skipping meals. At $1,012 a month for an individual, the challenge is definitely real for anyone. But for seniors who have high costs for health care or housing or transportation, I might say challenges of housing and transportation and health care and since I'm there, that challenge is even tougher. That's just one of the reasons why so many seniors are going hungry. It's also a good reason why the use of the chain CPI, the Consumer Price Index calculation that assumes people will substitute less expensive cat food for grandma for what they currently consume. And why that's so dangerous. Because grandma right now is eating the gourmet cat food. That's what she can afford. Okay? If the economy goes bad, the calculation is that, well, they'll just get the less expensive cat food. They don't have to have the gourmet cat food. They can have the regular generic cat food. Wow. That's taking care of America. Feeding America calls it an epidemic that will affect more than 8 million people by 2050 should the Trump administration go through with its proposed change. It will be worse. But there are so many factors at work here. There are still 3 million people 65 and older who are still paying student loans. I warn them, don't get out a loan. Don't get a grant. No one listened. And whose Social Security is being seized to pay for loans. And for many, particularly women, Social Security is already inadequate to see them through a month. And the issue is getting worse. Swartz Center for Economic Policy Analysis at the New School estimates that 40% of middle-class Americans will be living either at the edge or in poverty by the time they're 65 if current policies do not change. Cody Fenwick of Alternate brings us this final offering here in the Bistro Cafe of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Under Donald Trump, the U.S. government will be largely rolling back efforts to seriously grapple with the coming dangers posed by climate change, and that was in a report revealed yesterday, Monday, in the New York Times. The Times wrote, in the next few months, the White House will complete the rollback of the most significant federal effort to curb greenhouse gas emissions initiated during the Obama administration. Oh, wow. More of what the black guy did has to be destroyed. Every single bit of it. You know, the new Egyptian pharaoh always tried to eradicate any personage, any public proclamation, any memory of the preceding pharaoh. Weird, huh? Well, these efforts will expand to impose Trump's hardline views on other nations, building on his retreat from the Paris Accord and his recent refusal to sign a communique to protect the rapidly melting Arctic region unless it was stripped of any references to climate change. And in what could be Mr. Trump's most consequential action yet, his administration will seek to undermine the very science on which climate change policy rests. Trump officials are directing many of the administration's researchers and scientists to severely restrict their modeling of climate change and global warming going forward. Instead of projecting possible climate scenarios up to the year 2100, the administration will cut the models off at 2040. At which point many of the most extreme efforts of climate change are unlikely to have been felt. Well, if you just measure it differently, everybody knows in quantum mechanics things don't exist unless you measure them. And if you measure things past 2040, well, of course you're going to have a bunch of terrible scenarios that are going to skew the really positive findings you need to keep making money and deliver property vacant to a hostile foreign power. Because let's be clear, the Russians want the Northwest Passage. They don't want the Arctic to keep being frozen. They want it melted. All right, let's get to our break. And when we come back from that break, we're going to go through weather from around the world. And my God, is there weather from around the world? And we're going to finish up with the stories that we have curated for you today. You are listening to West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, and we will be right back.
You are listening to netrootsradio.com.
Please hang up and try again.
From a point at sea to the circles of your mind, a new force is at work for planetary transformation. New radio for a new Earth.
This is Take Two Movie Review. I'm Mike Friend. This week, Middle-earth, or at least Middle Ground. Released most likely coincidentally with the culmination of the Game of Thrones phenomenon, the movie Tolkien takes us back to where it all started, as it's a fair conjecture that without his Lord of the Rings and The Hobbit, interest in fantasy at the level we've seen may not have ever happened. Tolkien is a biopic, a necessarily fraught formula. This one picks up with the action in the bloody trenches of World War I, a known influence on the author, and returns there frequently as we are familiarized with his early life, which includes being orphaned at an early age with a brother who somehow disappears from the narrative here. We see him form a circle of friends at school, meet his love interest, and witness his budding affinity for language. Into all this, director Dom Karokowski, a major Tolkien fan himself, carefully weaves in subtle and not-so-subtle references from the literary works, which were met with satisfied-sounding sighs, at least from the audience I was with. How this really helps the movie, though, is another question. Tolkien's friends may have been a fellowship. Edith, his love interest, probably was enamored of Wagner's Ring cycle, and those scenes are among the movie's best for different reasons, and maybe the trenches did inspire Mordor, but after the third or fourth apparition in Battlefield Smoke, we have the idea. Though the acting from Nicholas Hoult as the lead and Lily Collins as Edith is first class, the period composition exquisite, and the direction impeccable, the characters feel truncated and developed only as far as necessary to keep the stream of life-to-works parallels going. Ultimately, Tolkien is a movie for fans, and if you are one, it will add to your knowledge of this beloved figure, and all without you having to worry if it'll win any awards. This has been Take Two Movie Review. I'm Mike Friend. Catch up with us at Take2MovieReview.com and feed us back on our page on YouTube.
This is Scientific American's 60-Second Science. I'm Annie Sneed.
The beak shapes of different species of Galapagos finches played an important part in Darwin's conception of natural selection.
In our field, there is this presumption that the beak shape in birds is quite correlated with what they eat. and how they eat it. So they're feeding ecologists.
Guillermo Navalon, a PhD student at the University of Bristol in the UK, and a co-author of a new study that found that the connection between beak shape and diet isn't as tight as we thought. The study's in the journal Evolution. Navalon and his colleagues analyzed photographs of museum specimens of 176 bird skulls. They looked at beak shape and size in almost all of the orders of modern birds and compared the beaks with other factors, such as feeding behavior and body size. And they found that the beak shape was indeed somewhat tied to what birds feed on and how they eat, but the relationship was actually surprisingly weak, accounting for just 12% of beak shape variation.
The explanation that we extract from there is that the beak are basically surrogate hands in birds. So they are used for a plethora of different functions beyond feeding ecology. So like the beak in general in birds have many other functions. So they use it for display, nest construction, singing, thermoregulation in some cases, like toucans or like hornbills. So there is like a lot of factors that probably have intervened in the evolution of beak in birds.
Thanks for listening. For Scientific American's 60-Second Science, I'm Annie Sneed.
This is a message from CDC.
After hurricanes, tornadoes, and floods, standing water and excess moisture help mold grow in your home, garage, and other structures. When you return to a home that has been flooded, know that you're likely to have mold. Mold puts your family's health at risk. If you have mold growing in your home, you should clean it up and fix other water problems, such as leaks in roofs, walls, or plumbing. Keep your children and pets out of affected areas until you've cleaned. Control moisture in your home to prevent mold growth. To remove mold growth from hard surfaces, use commercial products, soap and water, or a bleach solution of no more than 1 cup of household laundry bleach in 1 gallon of water. Follow the manufacturer's instructions. Never mix bleach with ammonia or other household cleaners. It will produce dangerous, toxic fumes. Open windows and doors to provide fresh air.
For more information, visit cdc.gov or call 1-800-CDC-INFO.
This is an important message from the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services. After a storm or disaster, it's important to eat only safe food. Throw away perishables like meat, poultry, fish, eggs, and leftovers stored above 40 degrees Fahrenheit for 2 hours or more. Throw away food with an unusual odor, color, or texture. Throw away food that may have come in contact with floodwater, including food in swollen, punctured, and damaged cans. When in doubt, throw it out.
This program is presented by the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention.
Welcome to A Cup of Health with CDC, a weekly feature of the MMWR, the Morbidity and Mortality Weekly Report. I'm Dr. Jeffrey Nemhauser, filling in for your host, Dr. Kathleen Dooling. As the U.S. population ages, more people are at risk for injuries. The largest percentage of injury-related deaths among this group are caused by falls. Elizabeth Burns is with CDC's National Center for Injury Prevention and Control. She's joining us today to discuss ways to prevent injuries and deaths from falls among senior adults. Welcome to the show, Elizabeth.
Thanks for having me.
Elizabeth, what are some of the more common consequences when a senior adult falls?
Well, first, it's important to note that falls are incredibly common. More than 1 in 4 older adults will fall in a given year. Common consequences include loss of independence and an increased fear of falling, as older adults are afraid to do the same kinds of activities they were doing before. And this can actually lead to more falls, as older adults have less strength in their lower body. Common consequences include hip fracture and traumatic brain injury. And ultimately, in 2016, almost 30,000 older adults died because of a fall.
So are falls more common in men or in women?
Falls are more common in women, and more women go to the emergency department because of a fall, and more women die because of a fall. However, the rate of fall deaths are more common in men than women. What this means is that out of 100,000 men, more will die from a fall than out of 100,000 women.
What are common causes of falls among older people?
Getting on and off the toilet and getting in and out of bed are common causes of falls. Walking around the hallways at night when the lights are off is a common way people fall. There's also an increased amount of medications used in seniors, which have side effects like making them lightheaded, and that increases the risk of falls and is a common cause.
With all of those factors, what are some ways our listeners can decrease their chances of falling?
Older adults should talk to their healthcare provider or doctor about how they can decrease their chances of falling. This can be done during the annual wellness visit or during annual physicals. The doctor will recommend an exercise program that should increase strength and balance or maybe refer you to a physical therapist. Additionally, they can look through your medications and perhaps reduce your doses or suggest medications that decrease your chances of falls.
Are there things we can do to modify our homes to prevent falling?
Oh, absolutely. Installing grab bars on the side of the toilet, making sure that rugs are taped down or removed, making sure that there's lighting in the hallways are all really simple ways that an older adult can modify their home to prevent falls.
Where can listeners go to get more information about preventing falls?
Listeners can go to cdc.gov/study, and that's spelled STEADI.
Thanks, Elizabeth. I've been talking today with Elizabeth Burns about ways to prevent fall-related injuries and deaths among senior adults. Improving strength and agility through regular exercise and removing potential obstacles in the home can help decrease the risk for falls. If you or a loved one is older and struggle with mobility, talk with a healthcare provider about ways to decrease the risks for fall-related injuries and death. Until next time, be well. This is Dr. Jeffrey Nemhauser for A Cup of Health with CDC.
For the most accurate health information, visit cdc.gov or call 1-800-CDC-INFO.
Hi, it's Tom. Could we humbly suggest your donation to netrootsradio.com? All we've got to run this 24-hour powerhouse of progressive resistance radio is what comes out of our own wallets. And you are our biggest donor. And it doesn't take much, $3, $5. Just go to the bottom of our netrootsradio.com page and hit our secure donate button. Heck, you can even make a recurring contribution. And you'll get a wondiferous pair of Netroots radio stickers for application to your backpack, your bumper sticker, or your banjo. Well, it's up to you which backpack you want to put it on. So donate what you'd like at the bottom of our netrootsradio.com's homepage. Because you are our biggest donor. Netrootsradio.com. Together, we are Resistance Radio.
Quote, the Russian government interfered in the 2016 presidential election in sweeping and systematic fashion. Who said that?
Listen up. This matters. I'm Louis Black, and this is the Civil Liberties Minute with ACLU attorney Bill Newman.
That would be the same person who said that Russia interfered by carrying out, quote, a social media campaign that favored presidential candidate Donald J. Trump and disparaged presidential candidate Hillary Clinton, and by utilizing, quote, a Russian intelligence service that conducted computer intrusion operations against entities, employees, and volunteers working on the Clinton campaign, and then released stolen documents, end quote. The same person who said that the Russian entity called IRA, the Internet Research Agency, conducted, quote, a social media campaign designed to provoke and amplify political and social discord in the United States. And then went on to say, in total, that Russian agency, quote, controlled accounts that made over 80,000 posts, which may have reached an estimated 126 million people, according to Facebook. The person who said all this is the special counsel Robert Mueller. So when we think about what is necessary to protect American democracy in 2020 and beyond, we thought it useful to hear what the special counsel actually found.
The Civil Liberties Minute is made possible by the American Civil Liberties Union because freedom can't defend itself.
The most ridiculous thing about Donald Trump's xenophobic, demagogic assault on Central American amnesty seekers is that his frantic demand to build a $5 billion border wall is not his most ridiculous ploy. Even more ridiculous is his panicky political assertion that the caravans coming north through Mexico are gangs of rapists, murderers, and terrorists out to slaughter and conquer us. Never mind that the migrants he demonizes are overwhelmingly women, children, and peaceful families who are fleeing the terrifying gangs, extortionists, and corrupt officials who've turned their lives in El Salvador, Guatemala, and Honduras into hell. But rather than greet these refugees with a policy of common compassion and long-term solutions, Trump and his fellow Republican screechers have militarized the border to separate them from their children, incarcerate them, and turn them into political pawns for Trump's re-election campaign. But wait, it gets more ridiculous. Crying that the three countries should bar these desperate families from fleeing the horrors of home, Trump has peevishly and stupidly cut off U.S. aid intended to battle the gang violence driving them northward. Okay, Trump has no empathy or subtlety, but how smart do you have to be to see that if you have no strategy to help mitigate the nightmarish conditions of your neighbors, you'll have to cope with the fallout on your own doorstep? This is Jim Hightower saying, most ridiculous of all, though, is that we have a president with a moral compass that points only to policies that serve his ego and political needs. Trump doesn't really want any border solution at all, not even a wall. He wants a crisis, a bugaboo to demagogue for his own political advancement, no matter how many families suffer. He's a pathetic weakling of a president, ridiculously masquerading as a strongman.
Need an antidote to the progressive blues? Want some good news about how grassroots folks are rebelling against the corporate powers and winning? Well, here's an easy-to-swallow pill for you, the Hightower Lowdown. Hightower's monthly newsletter will give you the lowdown, even as it lifts you up. It's 4 pages a month, jam-packed with facts you can use, actions you can take, and Jim's own Texas humor, all for only $15 a year. To become a lowdowner, go to hightowerlowdown.org.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1946. That was the day the working people of New York stood up in true labor solidarity. It all started at the stroke of midnight on May 15th, as messengers delivered the following statement to 489 municipal employees. This is to advise you that the position you held in the Department of Public Works has been abolished by the city manager, and your services with the city of Rochester are terminated as of midnight this date. This action is the result of a change of policy deemed necessary to protect public interest. What was the workers' so-called act against public interest? Trying to form a union. Earlier that May, city workers had founded the Federation of State, County, and Municipal Employees, Local 871, as part of the AFL. The next day, 500 city workers crowded into the Carpenters Hall to figure out what to do next. Teamsters Locals 118 and 398 pledged their support. The area labor councils of both the AFL and CIO met to plan their response. On May 20th, labor called for a public protest and 24-hour-a-day pickets of the Department of Public Works. The next day, 54 picketers were arrested. Finally, at 3 a.m. on this day in labor history, a citywide general strike was declared. Newspaper presses fell silent and buses did not run. More than 13,000 members of the Amalgamated Clothing Workers Union walked off the job. In all, more than 30,000 workers joined the strike. After one day, the city gave in. They agreed to reinstate the fired workers and recognize their right to form a union. Today, public unions are again under attack, and labor solidarity is more important than ever.
Labor History in 2 brought to you by the Illinois Labor History Society and The Rick Smith Show.
Thank you for accompanying us here to the chef's table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy Tarrytown Chowder Tuesdays. We always begin weather from around the world along the banks of the Rogue River and the Rogue River Valley of southern Oregon on the west coast of the continental United States of America, where it is currently 54 degrees Fahrenheit, slated for a high of around 80. We have cloudy conditions. Winds are light and variable out of the southeast, and they will be shifting, out of the northwest in about 2 hours at a clip of 5 to 10 miles per hour, shifting again out of the west-northwest, but at that clip. Tonight, where we are expecting a low of the mid-50s. Tomorrow, we expect a high in the low to mid-80s, and winds continuing out of the north-northwest at 5 to 10 miles per hour. We did, as I mentioned earlier, have a tremendous amount of Hawaii-type rain, tropical rain. It was warm and a lot of it. And looks like we will be drying out those small chances of rain, maybe scattered throughout the region, but very scattered and very low percentage. The grass pollen is rated at very high. Air quality index locally is at 23 parts per million, and the daytime UV index is also very high at 9. So if you have those numbers in your area, take extra care. Barometric pressure is falling at 29.89 inches. Visibility is at 8 miles, and relative humidity is 93%. Weather from around the world is brought to you by people's personal weather stations that they purchased. These people planted these purchased personal weather stations somewhere on their property, and these people positively live around the world. London is 60 and partly cloudy. Paris is 65 and cloudy with a possibility of thunderstorms that could impact the electrical grid. Rome is also under the same thunderstorm warning. Their temperature is 71 degrees and mostly cloudy. Kiev is 80 degrees and fair. Kabul is 74 degrees and clear. Hong Kong is 77, mostly cloudy. Tokyo is 70 degrees with showers in the vicinity and a flood watch. Sydney, Australia is 56 degrees and clear. San Francisco, California is 57 degrees and partly cloudy, with a wind advisory for small craft on the bay and offshore. And New York is 67 degrees Fahrenheit and cloudy. And that is weather from around the world, brought to you by people's personal weather stations that they purchased. These people planted these purchased personal weather stations somewhere on their property. And these people positively live around the world. Philip Alterman of the UK Guardian brings us this first amuse-bouche here at the chef's table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. The Australian Chancellor Sebastian Kurz, the horror, is ousted in a no-confidence vote, and it couldn't have happened to a more despicable person. In this reporter's opinion, of course. Austria's chancellor has been ousted in a no-confidence vote just a day after a center-right party enjoyed a triumphant night in the EU elections after opposition politicians lost faith in his handling of a corruption scandal that has engulfed his former far-right coalition partner. Austria will be governed by a technocratic administration of experts and senior civil servants until fresh elections scheduled for early September. Now, this came really on the day that Angela Merkel warned of dark and malevolent forces of the right casting a broad shadow over Europe and beyond. During a debate in which the delegates of the far-right Freedom Party, the FPO, resolutely refused to lend Sebastian Kurz the customary applause, Right-wing populist politicians accuse the center-right chancellor of trying to use a so-called Ibiza scandal to consolidate his power at the top of government. Now, this is the Ibiza scandal is where some politicians in his party got stung in an investigation in which a woman expressed an interest in gaining control of the country's largest circulation tabloid, the Kronenzeitung. Well, this politician, Strash, we had reported on this fellow last week, replied that after staff changes at the paper, it could help the FPO in his election campaign. Now, of course, this fellow Strash was plied with copious amounts of vodka. So I guess he could use that as an excuse for selling out his country and trying to make a bunch of money at the same time. Because of that, Sebastian Kurz, the golden boy, the millennial falcon, he's a Nazi, let's be clear. While he's out, no confidence.
Je te donne ce mon amour pour la vie entière. La promesse de me trouver à tes genoux. Aussitôt que tu m'appelles, rester toujours fidèle. C'est tout, c'est tout. Je te donne tous mes printemps, mes étés de mer. Mes automnes, quand les feuilles tombent partout. Si ce n'est pas une bonne affaire, je te donne tous mes hivers, c'est tout.
Anonymous worker bees at Reuters bring us this final amuse-bouche here at the chef's table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Two major shipping lines this month have raised their rates for transporting goods from the U.S. to Venezuela, according to 3 industry sources and 2 documents, as U.S. sanctions limit transit between the two nations. Washington on the 15th of May banned direct flights between the U.S. and Venezuela, citing safety concerns as part of a broad package of sanctions meant to pressure Nicolas Maduro into resigning as president of the crisis-stricken country. Could we do that to Russia? I wonder. Citizens and social service organizations often depend on air and sea shipments for basic food and medicine in the hyperinflationary nation where a monthly minimum wage barely pays for a single meal. A whole month, and you get to eat one meal. Better save up. Shipping lines Hamburg Süd and King Ocean Services have added a surcharge of $1,200 per container of cargo that leaves the U.S. for Venezuela after the 15th of May. That service has in recent months been costing between $3,000 and $5,000 depending on the cargo. Shipping companies have increased the cost of their services because of the risk involved in coming to Venezuela with sanctions, said a local shipping industry source who asked not to be identified because he might conveniently end up, pushed out of a 5-story window. Hamburg Süd and King Ocean Services did not respond to requests for comment. Why would they? They're above the law. Isn't all business? In 2016, shipping lines were charging up to 3 times more to travel to Venezuela than to other South American countries. U.S. sanctions did not prevent shipping lines from delivering goods to Venezuela. Washington, in April, sanctioned 4 shipping companies and 9 oil tankers, it said, were involved in oil shipments to Cuba. Well, that brings us to the end of our broadcast period for the day, but Netroots Radio is going to broadcast on. We'll meet up here tomorrow for Smothered Benedict Wednesdays. So stay tuned to Netroots Radio all day and all night for all the breaking news as it breaks, and we'll meet up here tomorrow, right here in West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Bon appetit.
Je voudrais du soleil vert, des dentelles et des théâtres, des photos de bord de mer, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je voudrais de la lumière, comme en Nouvelle-Angleterre. Je veux changer d'atmosphère, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Ma fleur sous la pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, qu'il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Je voudrais du Fred Astaire, revoir un latte Goël. Je voudrais toujours te plaire, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je veux déjeuner par terre, comme au long de golfe clair, t'embrasser les yeux ouverts, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Ba-da-da-dum-di-da-dum. 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 Dans mon jardin d'hiver. Ba-da-da-dum-di-da-dum. 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 Dans mon jardin d'hiver. Dans mon jardin d'hiver. Dans mon jardin d'hiver.